There was this young man who set out on a world tour, and he invited his friend to go along with him. The first stop was at Honolulu, where they took up a PR job. And only after taking it up did they realize that they had been tricked into offloading free encyclopedias door to door, in addition to selling the yearbook worth $400. The protagonist, admittedly a shy guy, couldn't sell, remember it was free, couldn't sell even one encyclopedia in an entire week. And he said that he couldn't do it, even if his life depended on it. And as fate would have it, a few years later, he set up his own company. He says that the first few years of his life as an entrepreneur was filled with hurdles. And in fact, he says that the company's first 18 years of existence was almost always in debt, and that any wrong move would result in bankruptcy. Remember that around 60 years or 40 years ago, it wasn't really easy to set up and run a business, even in the US. Things started looking up for the company when they managed to sign up a few celebrities as their brand ambassadors. However, there was a twist, and sales started falling in the mid-1980s. And they realized that they had narrowed their market they had defined their market very narrowly. And competitors started eating into this company's market share. Our protagonist, who said he hated advertising, ended up meeting an ad agency, which itself was an upstart. And he told the ad agency guys that he hates advertising. The ad agency guys, however, started asking him questions about the company, the brand, and what they stood for, what they represented. Once this conversation was over, this man realized that he didn't hate advertising, but that he hated the traditional form of advertising. He obviously did not want to go the encyclopedia route. So with the help of this ad agency, they launched a number of ad campaigns. And through the stories that they told through the ad campaigns, they defined who they were, what the company stood for. The company was bold, was consistent with whatever it said it stood for, and also was unafraid to take a stand whenever required. And its revenue has been consistently increasing in the last few years. And in May, June 2021-22, its revenue touched $46.8 billion and brought in net profit of over $6 billion. They managed to create one of the most iconic brands in the world, and it's still among the top leaders in the space it operates. Any guesses as to which brand we are talking about here? You could probably draw the logo of the company in air, and I'll try to figure out if you got it right. Or you can even shout out the name. No, that's not the right answer. Anybody else? Whoa, that's amazing. Yes, so it was Phil Knight who founded Nike with the iconic swoosh and the logo Just Do It. The influence that you have is like the light from a lighting source. The lighting source largely determines the kind of light that emanates from it, which means that the kind of influence that you have largely is dependent on you, your personality, and your behavior. I would like to quote from Phil Knight's book, Shoe Dog, and I despised it to boot. I'd been slightly better at selling mutual funds, but I'd felt dead inside. So why was selling shoes so different? Because I realized it wasn't selling. I believed in running. I believed that if people got out and ran a few miles every day, the world would be a better place. and I believed these shoes were better to run in. People, sensing my belief, wanted some of that belief for themselves. Belief, I decided. Belief is irresistible sometimes. Oh, close quotes. I would like to talk about the types of power. And for this, I'd like to quote something that social researchers John R.P. French and Bertram Raven came up with in 1959. They came up with 5 bases of power: reward power, coercive power, legitimate power, expert power, and referent power. So reward power is when one offers some benefits in exchange for a job well done. Legitimate power is one when somebody exercises because of the title or position that they hold. Coercive power is when one uses threat or fear to get something done. Expert power is when one is extremely knowledgeable about something and people naturally gravitate towards them to benefit from their experience. And referent power is basically when you're inspired by someone, you want to be like them, you want to emulate them. I think, given the 5 types of power that we just spoke about, I believe that I've had a great influence by the combination of expert power as well as referent power. Let me explain. So when I started off as a business journalist, I do not have a background in economics or commerce. As luck would have it, I met a group of senior journalists at some press conferences, and not only were they expert in their domains, but they were kind enough to explain the concepts to me, to explain what each term meant, to explain how businesses function. And without them, I don't think, my business journalism career would have probably taken off. So I'm really thankful for that kind of influence that they've had on me. And I hope that I'm able to pay it forward by influencing other young journalists who are just starting off their careers. And as an example of expert power, so, from my observation, I realized that whenever I have to interview somebody or I have to, maybe meet sources and ask them questions to get some information for a particular story, the more in-depth my research is, the better the interviews are. And conversely, when I really do not have much time to do research, the interviews turn out to be average and the story is not as enriching as the former example. In a society as complex as ours, we see a mix of all the 5 types of power, right? So in my experience at least, I believe that coercive power doesn't really work in most situations. And the importance of expert power and referent power, I think the combination does really, really well. Legitimate power and reward power have their own uses, and I don't think they should be dismissed altogether. And when I refer to the kind of influence that I had as a business journalist, in retrospect, I believe that the values that I hold dear to me, I got influenced by people whose values matched or aligned with me. So I think it's a very important step to be self-aware, to be aware of your core values, what your personality traits are, and who you are as a person. Because it is very easy to get influenced by people whose values are similar to your values. And we sort of tend to lose sight of who we are as a person and what our values are, what our personality is. And if we do that, then we can really get influenced by other factors which we do not want to actually get influenced by. Another factor that comes from my reporting days is that we end up meeting all kinds of people, right from politicians, businessmen, businesswomen, farmers, people from the poultry industry, truck drivers, and so on. And we end up meeting people who are who have very charismatic personalities, right? So I think as journalists, there is that check that we always need to have, where we do not really get influenced by the personalities of the people we interview or get information from for our articles, and stick to the core values of being a journalist and be true to our profession. And as a journalist, I keep getting approached by different companies, different organizations, different people who share their story pitches with me. That's a very important source of news flow, by the way. But what happens is we cannot really cover every story idea or every article idea that comes our way, right? So there are a certain guidelines and filters that these stories need to pass. And we have to say no to most of the people that come to us. But then that's a very tricky thing to do, because these people are important sources for us, are an important flow of news for us. So I think the key there is to basically be empathetic, because some people can be really persuasive. Some company representatives can be really persuasive and insist that you write about them or you talk about them in your publication. And talking about persuasion as a tool, I have consistently used it throughout my journalism days. A couple of stories come to mind when I talk about persuasion. One is there was this, it still exists, it's a traditional huge company in the southern parts of India. And it has been in existence for 80, 90 years. The company is extremely media shy. People from the company generally refuse to speak to the media, grant any interviews. So I had been trying to reach some of the representatives of the company, some of the leaders of the companies, to just strike some relationships and get to know more about the company. It's actually a group of companies. And then I realized that it wasn't working. So I approached the chairman's PA, and I said I need an interview with the chairman. And the PA outrightly told me, that's not going to happen. This has never happened in our history. Generally, our chairperson, do not grant interviews, so it's never going to happen. But I was persistent. I contacted the PR firm that handled that group, and I said I needed an interview with the chairman. They gave me the same answer. For a year, I kept calling them, kept emailing them, kept texting them, not every day. I was not I didn't really bother them. I was very careful about that. But I was very consistent. I would show up at all their press conferences and I would put in their request. After one full year, I got a call saying the chairman has agreed to meet you. It was one of the best interviews I've ever done. And I think also I recognized that I got a lot of recognition for that huge interview that I got. It lasted 90 minutes. And the chairman spoke about everything, about all the companies that they had. And I realized that persuasion can be a really strong tool if you use it right. Another instance comes to my mind is I heard that a few years ago, I heard that Jeffrey Archer, the celebrated author, was in town. And he was giving interviews to only a few select people. And I wasn't among them. I was a young journalist, and they really did not include me in that list. But on the morning that Jeffrey Archer was in town, he was there only for a day. I got to know about this, and I immediately contacted the PR firm that was handling his media interviews. And I said, I need a slot. The PR said, the PR person was very apologetic and said, I'm sorry, but this is the mandate I've got. And he is only speaking to a few people. I'm sorry, he does not have any time today. His calendar is completely booked. I tried, sort of insisting that this happens. I said even a 10-minute interview would do. But the PR was apologetic and said, sorry, ma'am, it's not happening. And then I asked him, where is it happening? And he named a popular hotel in the city. And I said, okay, I'm coming there. I said, ma'am, I'm really sorry. I know what you're trying to do, but it's not going to work. I said, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to, hold it against you. But I'm just doing my job. You're doing your job. Let us both do our jobs. So I go to the hotel, and the PR person is apologizing again because, they also need to talk to us for other clients of theirs. So I said, you do not really have to apologize. I totally understand your situation. And, but I hope you understand mine as well. Imagine 3 other newspapers having Jeffrey Archer's interviews, and I'm not. My newspaper is not. And most of my career, I've been the sole journalist for my publication in Chennai. The rest of the newspapers would have at least 2 or 3 in their team. So I had to sort of get the interview. And who wouldn't want to meet Jeffrey Archer, right? So I sat at the hotel lobby, and it was, I think, 5 hours, 6 hours. The PR kept apologizing. I said, it's fine. I'm just sitting here. I'm just doing my job. And I said, just do me one favor. Just go and tell the author that, there's this person who's insisting on an interview, and if he can please even allow 10 minutes. And I think towards the end of the evening, I think around 6 o'clock, they came and told me, yes, he will do a 10-minute slot, but no more than that. I was extremely thrilled. And the 10-minute went on to be a 30-minute interview. It was an amazing interview, and one that I'll always cherish. So when I was talking about persuasion as a tool. So when people and companies approach journalists with their story pitches, I think we have to be empathetic first. That's the key, because you know that they're just doing their job. But it is also your duty to be polite, empathetic, and also say a firm no. Ultimately, you have to abide by your professional integrity. What exactly does it mean to be your true self? There is a lot of talk about bring your whole selves to work or be an authentic leader, because people want to see an authentic leader. But what does that exactly mean? In my previous role, I had the opportunity to interview Mark Efron. He's a best-selling author of this book called 8 Steps to High Performance. In that, one of the steps is fake it. So he says that people would forgive leaders or those who are trying to wield influence if they fake good behaviors. So he gave an example of his life. So I asked him, can you give an example from your life as to, what do you mean by fake it? So he said that he's an introverted guy. He's a shy guy. He absolutely hates going up on stage and addressing a large audience. But he absolutely adores another author called Marshall Goldsmith, who's, again, a best-selling author of What Got You Here Will Not Get You There. Marshall is a very warm, egregious kind of a guy, and the audience just loves him whenever he goes up on stage. So Marx told me that on days when he didn't feel like going up on stage and addressing a large gathering because of his introverted nature, he would just ask himself, what would Marshall do in this situation? And he would just go on to the stage and behave like Marshall. And the crowd would love him. He says that the crowd doesn't think you're faking a behavior, because people love it when somebody fakes good behaviors to get a particular outcome. And talking about another example, Mark said that he worked with an entrepreneur. who, again, hated talking to people and, being by himself. So, and he wanted to stay away from office politics. So Mark advised him to give an Oscar performance in the next meeting and as an emerging leader. He said, "You will fake being an emerging leader." The entrepreneur reluctantly took his advice and he engaged with the people. He cracked jokes, he shared his ideas, and his colleagues or his team absolutely loved him. And Mark says that in certain contexts, in certain situations, you have to adopt certain qualities or certain behaviors to get the end result. But again, that moralistic question of, so should you be authentic or should you be fake, right, comes in. So even in my career, I have faced that conundrum, especially in my early days. Again, I'm going back to my early days quite a bit because I think those are the times when I have picked up quite a few valuable lessons. So I used to think that business conversations, interviews, meetings should be only related to work, and you shouldn't really indulge in conversations other than work. And I think I was both right and wrong. How was I wrong? I was wrong because you cannot really operate like an island. You cannot, keep all your business conversations and meetings very transactional. I think you need to engage with the human side of the other person as well. It really depends on the individual and the context. But I think in the last few years, at least, I have made attempts to know about the person that I'm interviewing or I'm meeting with for a particular article or story, and try to bring those up in the conversation to engage with them. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But whenever it does, the kind of stories that come out are extremely enriching. And to prove the point, Hilary Gallo, a lawyer, coach, negotiation expert, and author of The Power of Soft, says, "Power doesn't lie in your head. It lies in the perception of the other person." But I'm not really going to argue with all the research papers and experts. But my personal take is that you should really reveal or carefully consider before choosing to reveal certain personality traits depending on the person, the context, and the situation, right? So think of, let's say, a washing machine or a microwave. So you change the settings according to the clothes or the dishes that you have. So accordingly, I think my personal take is that you do not need to be fake. You do not need to lie. Be truthful, be authentic, but I do not think it is practically possible to show your entire true self in all settings, especially professional settings. It doesn't work. So with certain people, you can be vulnerable. With certain people, you have to be very businesslike. With certain people, it's a mix of both. So it's an art, and I think you can master it with some practice and constant self-awareness and sound judgment. So with the examples I've made so far, there are a few common threads. One of them is credibility, right? So how credible as a person are you? Do you do as you say? Do you say as you do? Do you promise as you deliver? Another thread is reliability. Are you a reliable person? Can somebody bank on you to get something done? And the third thread is intimacy. How good are you in terms of getting the other person to open up? Are you a gossip person? Do you complain? Are you empathetic? Do you give the space to the other person to understand that they can actually open up to you and share their ideas and feelings with you? The fourth point is self-orientation. The higher the self-interest in any particular situation, any particular relationship, the lower is your trustworthiness. And I'm talking about the trust equation, which I think most of you would have come across. So the trust equation goes this way. Trustworthiness is equal to reliability into credibility into intimacy by self-orientation. And one of my cousins who works with a lot of NGOs uses this trust equation to assess non-profit organizations and their funding opportunities. He says that it is very easy to understand if the NGO heads that he meets are self-oriented or not, or are they selfish or not. And he uses this trust equation to basically see if they are eligible for funding opportunities. But if you're talking about self-orientation, right, which is basically not only having interest in getting your outcomes accomplished, but also in terms of understanding the other person in the equation, being empathetic, and also figuring out uh, the point of the larger good, right? Are they also benefiting from it? So, but what is the motivation to be concerned about others and not just about your own tasks or your own objectives or outcomes? So, I would, of course, there is this concept of altruism. But if we have to really quote some studies, I would quote a survey by survey that Cheryl Wooden, the first Asian American reporter who won the Pulitzer, she has quoted a survey that basically spoke about how a particular part of the brain lights up, when they give. And that part of the brain that lights up when somebody gives is in the same area of the brain that lights up when you are eating ice cream or when you're falling in love. And half of the respondents of the survey said that they experienced intense pleasure when they gave rather than when they received. And she further says that exercising 4 times a week can reduce one's risk of mortality by 30%, whereas volunteering for 2 or more organizations can reduce one's mortality by 44%. But please don't give up on your running shoes, folks. Phil Knight won't be pleased. And so I would like to say that, wielding soft power is a win-win for all. I think it considers the greater good rather than interests in your own self. And I'd like to end this by quoting from Ron Hogan's contemporary spin on the Tao Te Ching, a Chinese classic text written around 400 BC, and it's traditionally credited to sage Lao Tzu. If you want to be a leader who's in touch with Tao, never use violence to achieve your goals. Every act of violence backfires. An army on the move leaves a trail of tears, and a military victory always lies in ruins. The masters do what needs doing, and that's all they do. Do what you have to do without arrogance or pride. Get the job done and don't brag about it afterwards. Do what you have to do, not for your own benefit, but because it needs to be done. And don't do it the way you think it should be done. Do it the way it needs to be done. Thank you for your time.